The night sky of Luthor was unlike any world Marcus Harlow had ever seen. It wasn't just dark, it was endless. Endless, except for the scattered stars that shone like jewels scattered across black velvet. Beneath that sky, the battlefield was silent for a moment, before the sounds of war thundered again. The crackling of blaster fire, the roar of alien creatures, and the sound of metal on metal filled the air. The war between the human and alien forces had escalated, and Luthor, the homeworld of a mighty empire, was crumbling. Marcus had fought in many battles, but nothing had prepared him for this. Not the size of the Empress of Luthor or the brutal power she wielded. Not the alien landscape, with its jagged peaks and crimson rivers that twisted like veins through the land. But there she was, lying on the cold stone floor of a ruined temple, her armor shattered, her body bloodied. The Empress of Luthor, a towering alien whose skin shimmered like black obsidian, had led her people to victory countless times. Yet here she was wounded, struggling to stay conscious. The once immense power she commanded seemed so fragile now, and Marcus could hardly believe the sight before him. She was the symbol of her people's strength, their pride, and yet she was human in this moment, vulnerable. He rushed to her side, ignoring the chaotic sounds of war around him. The alien soldiers fought fiercely, but it didn't matter. His priority was her. The woman who had stood as a pillar of might and leadership was now crumpled, gasping for breath. "Empress," he called out, his voice shaking. Her violet eyes fluttered open, filled with pain. She blinked as if struggling to focus on him. Her breath was ragged, each one more labored than the last. Her usual strength was slipping away like water through his fingers. "Why are you here?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus knelt beside her, his hands shaking as he reached to touch her side. The wound was deep. An energy blade had sliced through her, and blood pooled around her like an ocean of dark crimson. "Because I couldn't leave you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything that had led him here. The bond they had formed in the last months of battle had been unexpected. She was the Empress of Luthor, her people saw her as a goddess. But to him, she was someone worth fighting for. Someone who, despite her alien status, felt human in every way that mattered. His fingers trembled as he pressed gently on her wound, trying to stop the bleeding, but her body stiffened under his touch. It was clear she was in pain, but more than that, something else was going on. There was something about the way her body tensed at his touch. "Don't," she gasped, the word barely escaping her lips. Marcus's brow furrowed in confusion. "What?" "Only my consort can touch here," she whispered, her voice strained. Marcus paused. The Empress was a figure of royalty, a symbol of the might and pride of her people. She had always been untouchable in the eyes of her soldiers, an immortal force whose command couldn't be questioned. To touch her, to offer anything more than the respect due to her station, was unheard of. "I'm not your consort," Marcus said softly, his heart heavy with the weight of the situation. He wasn't some prince, some chosen partner. He was a soldier, a human soldier, out of place on this alien world. The Empress looked at him, her eyes filled with a storm of emotions. She was royalty, but in this moment she seemed small. Even though she lay on the cold stone floor, she was still the ruler of this entire empire, and yet she was here, vulnerable just like him. "Then why are you here?" she whispered again, the question carrying with it the weight of everything she had been taught. The pride of her people, the laws that kept her distant from others. "Because I couldn't leave you behind," Marcus repeated. His voice was steady now, stronger than it had been a moment ago. He didn't have to explain himself, not to her, but his words came from a place deep within him. He had sworn an oath to protect her, not because she was an empress, but because she was someone who had earned his loyalty. There was silence between them, only the distant sounds of the battle echoing in the background. The Empress stared at him, and Marcus could feel the weight of her gaze. He saw something there, something he hadn't seen before, a flicker of something soft, something real that broke through the walls she had built around herself. It was only there for a moment, but it was enough. enough for him to know that she wasn't as untouchable as her people thought. She was just human. Her breath steadied, and Marcus knew that the battle wasn't over, not for her, not for them. But in that brief moment, in the quiet between heartbeats, he made a silent promise to her. He wouldn't leave her, not now, not ever. The Empress blinked and tried to sit up, but the pain stopped her. Her gaze softened as she looked at him one last time before the darkness closed in around her. "Stay with me," she whispered. And Marcus did. The Empress of Luthar's breathing was shallow, each intake of air a struggle. Her violet eyes were wide with pain, but they held something else now, something soft. Marcus held her carefully, his hands shaking as he pressed against her side, trying to keep the bleeding under control. The warmth of her blood soaked through his gloves, and he winced at the feeling, but he didn't pull away. He couldn't, not when her life was slipping away so quickly. The battlefield around them seemed distant, as if it were happening in another world. The sounds of war, the crackling of energy blasts, the distant cries of soldiers, felt like a memory. Here in this ruined temple there was only the two of them. The Empress, her face pale, and Marcus, struggling to hold on to her. He looked down at her, his heart pounding in his chest. She was unlike anything he had ever known. Tall, powerful, and breathtaking in her otherworldly beauty. Her skin, the color of smooth black stone, glinted faintly in the dim light. Her long hair, like a waterfall of midnight, framed her face, now etched with pain. Her regal armor, once so mighty, was torn and bloodied. She was no longer the Empress, the invincible leader of the Lotharian Empire, but just a woman in need of help. A woman who had trusted him to stay by her side. Marcus swallowed hard, forcing back the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered, his voice low but determined. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes closed briefly, and for a moment it seemed as if she might slip into unconsciousness. Panic surged through Marcus, but he held her tighter, leaning closer. "Stay with me," she managed to whisper, her voice weak but steady. His throat tightened, he nodded, his jaw clenched. "I'm here." The Empress's chest rose and fell with each laborious breath. Her head tilted slightly as she looked up at him, the storm of emotions in her eyes starting to fade, replaced with something quieter. Something that told Marcus she was no longer the untouchable ruler. She was just a woman, lying here, fragile and human. "Why do you stay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not supposed to be here, you're human." "I know," Marcus said softly, his hand still pressed against her wound. "But I'm not leaving you." Her eyes flickered, and for the briefest moment, something unreadable passed through her gaze. It wasn't a look of command or of the royal disdain he had seen in her before. It was something softer. The weight of her crown, of her empire, seemed to slip away in the quiet of the moment. There was no grand court, no waiting soldiers. Just the two of them, alone on this forsaken planet. "You shouldn't be here," she said again, but there was less strength in her voice. "The laws of my people." "I don't care about the laws," Marcus interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. "I care about you. You don't have to do this alone." Her eyes widened at his words, and for a moment her pride as the Empress of Lothar seemed to crumble. She was used to strength, to power. She was used to being the one in control, the one who led her people with an iron will. But now, as she lay in his arms, helpless, she felt vulnerable. "I'm no hero," Marcus added quietly, his thumb brushing against her skin. "I'm just a soldier, but I'm not going to let you die here, not when I've come this far." The Empress's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to speak but didn't know how. Her head leaned against him, her breath a soft, ragged sound against his chest. In that moment, Marcus could feel the weight of everything they had both faced, everything they would have to face together. The war, the battle, the differences between their species. But none of that seemed important anymore. All that mattered was that he had made a choice. He wasn't going to let her fall. Her eyes fluttered again, more closed than open now, but she held on just enough to stay aware of his presence. "I've never trusted anyone like this," she murmured, her voice laced with fatigue. Not even my consort. Marcus's heart skipped a beat at her words, his brow furrowed. What do you mean? Her gaze softened even more. A consort is the one who stays by my side always. They are the only ones who touch me in this way, no one else. The weight of her words settled over him like a heavy stone. Only a consort could touch her here in this intimate, vulnerable moment. And yet here he was, a mere human, someone who didn't belong to her world, her culture. Still, his hand remained pressed against her wound, his body close to hers. She wasn't alone anymore, no matter the rules of her people. I'm not your consort, Marcus said quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. But I'm not leaving you. Her lips trembled, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the Empress let herself close her eyes, surrendering to the moment. The Empress was gone for now, replaced by the woman who just needed someone to care. And for the first time in his life, Marcus felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. With her. The darkness of the temple was heavy, filled with the quiet sound of Marcus's breath as he knelt beside the Empress. Her violet eyes were closed, her chest rising and falling in slow, uneven breaths. The battle still raged outside, but here, in this forgotten corner of Luthar's sacred ruins, it felt like time had stopped. The chaos of war seemed so far away, a distant memory. The only thing that mattered was her. Marcus's hand stayed pressed gently on her wound, doing his best to stem the flow of blood, but even he knew he wasn't equipped to heal someone like her. The Empress was more than just a leader. She was a symbol of her people's strength and pride, a symbol of power. He wasn't trained to save the mighty. He was just a soldier, a human soldier, far from home, now sitting beside the woman who held the fate of an entire empire in her hands. Her eyes flickered open, soft light in their depths. The pain was still there, but something else lingered too, a soft, unexpected connection. The Empress was used to being the one in control. She was the ruler, the goddess-like figure whom her people revered. But right now, in this moment, it wasn't her power that defined her. It was the woman lying broken in his arms, the woman who needed someone to stay by her side, someone to trust, someone who would defy every law just to be with her. "Why are you still here?" she whispered, her voice soft, tired. The words barely escaped her lips, but they carried a weight far heavier than any battle. Marcus met her gaze, his expression unwavering. "Because I made a promise," he said. "I promised I'd keep you safe, and I don't break my promises." Her lips twitched, just barely, as if she wanted to smile, but the pain in her body wouldn't allow it. For a moment, there was nothing but the quiet between them. The Empress's chest rose and fell steadily, and Marcus sat beside her, never once letting go. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let her face this alone. "I'm not your consort," Marcus added quietly. It was the bitter truth. He was. He wasn't even a part of her world, her people. He was human, a simple soldier who had gotten caught up in a fight that had nothing to do with him. Yet here he was, sitting with the Empress as if they shared a bond that was more than duty, more than war. She looked at him again, her eyes narrowing slightly, studying him. "You're right," she said softly. "You are not my consort." There was a heaviness in her words. He could feel the weight of her people's expectations, the centuries-old laws that governed her life. No one touched her the way Marcus had. No one. The bond between an empress and her consort was sacred, untouchable. To break that bond was to break everything that had been built for generations. It was a law of her world, and it couldn't be ignored. "But you," her voice trailed off as she closed her eyes for a moment. "You should not be here. Only my consort is allowed to touch me this way. Only my consort can." "I don't care about the rules," Marcus interrupted, his voice stronger now. "Not when it comes to you. You're not alone in this, no matter what your people believe." The Empress's eyes opened again, and for the first time Marcus saw something in them he hadn't seen before. A kind of understanding. Her walls were still there. He could feel the weight of her royal identity pushing back against the softness that was starting to show. But there was something else there now, too. Something that made her look at him like she wasn't the ruler of an empire, like she was just a woman in pain, reaching out for someone to trust. "You are a fool," she said, but the words were soft, almost tender. "You don't understand the danger. My people, my court, they will never accept this. To touch me is to claim a power no one else can have. You, a human, would bring ruin." Marcus felt a cold chill run through him. Her words were like a warning, sharp and final, but he didn't flinch. He wasn't scared of her people, of her laws, of what they would do to him if they found out what he was doing. He only cared about her. "I'm not afraid of your people," Marcus said quietly, his eyes steady on hers. "And I'm not afraid of what might happen. I care about you. And if that means breaking every rule to stay with you, then that's what I'll do." The Empress's eyes held his, and for the first time the hardness in them seemed to soften. She seemed to be searching him, looking for something he couldn't name. Maybe she was looking for a reason to believe him. Maybe she was searching for something more than the cold distance she had always maintained. "I don't want to be weak," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't want to depend on anyone." "You're not weak," Marcus replied, his voice firm, "and you don't have to be alone." The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words and emotions neither of them had dared to confront. But in that quiet moment, there was something undeniable, something that pulled them together, something that made the rest of the universe fade away. The Empress, the great and powerful leader, was no longer just an untouchable ruler. She was someone who needed to be seen. She was someone who needed to be cared for. And for the first time, Marcus felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. "I'll stay with you," he said softly, his voice low but filled with certainty. "Always." The war outside the temple raged on. The crackling sound of energy blasts mixed with the distant roar of alien creatures. But inside the ruined walls of the ancient Lotharian temple, there was nothing but silence. Marcus sat beside the Empress, his fingers still pressing gently on her wound, trying to stop the blood that refused to stop flowing. Her breathing had steadied a little, but the pallor of her skin and the sharp lines of pain on her face told him she was far from okay. The battle was far from over, and he knew it. But right now, the only battle that mattered was the one for her life. "I won't leave you," Marcus said again, his voice thick with emotion. The words had become a promise, a vow that was now his to keep. He had said them before, but now, as he looked at the Empress, he knew they meant more than he could have ever imagined. The Empress shifted slightly, her gaze locking with his. There was a quiet intensity in her eyes, something vulnerable but powerful. She was used to being the one who commanded armies, to standing tall as a symbol of strength. But here, now, lying beside him, she was different. She was human again. She was just a woman who needed help, who needed someone to fight for her. "You can't stay here," she whispered, her voice weak but insistent. "The enemy is still out there, my people." "I'll stay with you until you're safe," Marcus interrupted softly. "We'll get through this together. I won't let anything happen to you." Her lips parted as if she wanted to argue, but then she winced, her hand instinctively reaching for the side of the temple wall to push herself up. "I have to fight," she said through gritted teeth. "Lothar's future. It depends on me." "No," Marcus said firmly, reaching out to stop her. "Your future depends on you staying alive." The Empress looked at him, her eyes flickering with something he hadn't seen before. It wasn't just pride or duty, it was fear. Fear of losing everything she had fought for. Fear of losing her people, her throne, her very life. She had always been the one in control. She had led Lothar for as long as anyone could remember, with an iron will and a heart hardened by years of battle. She had never known what it meant to rely on anyone. But now, in the face of death, she had no choice. "Please," Marcus said, his voice softer now. "Let me help you, let me protect you." The Empress's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she quickly looked away, blinking rapidly to push them back. She couldn't show weakness. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. "I'm the Empress," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "I have to lead my people. I can't afford to be weak." Marcus's heart broke at her words. She was a leader, a queen, and she carried that weight with her every moment of every day. But she was human too. She was allowed to be afraid. She was allowed to need help. "You're not weak," he said, his voice firm but kind. "You're a warrior, and warriors need others, even the strongest ones." The Empress's gaze softened as she looked at him, her lips parting slightly as if she were about to speak, but her breath caught in her throat. A sudden wave of pain swept over her, and she gasped, her body trembling. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Just stay." Marcus's hand tightened around hers, his heart racing as he held her. "Always," he said softly, "I'll stay, no matter what." For a moment they were silent. The only sound was the distant rumble of the battle outside, the clashing of steel and energy. But inside the temple, in this small, fragile moment, it felt as though everything had stopped. The Empress of Lothar, once untouchable, once a goddess in the eyes of her people, was now just a woman who needed someone to hold her. And Marcus was that someone. She closed her eyes, her head resting against the stone floor, and Marcus watched her, his hand still on her side. She was strong, he knew that, but she was also human, and in that moment it was that humanity that called to him. "I didn't want this," she whispered after a long silence, her voice heavy. "I didn't want to need anyone. I wanted to be the one to protect everyone. But you don't have to do it alone," Marcus finished for her. "No one does." Her eyes met his again, and in that moment everything seemed to shift. The weight of her crown, the expectations of her people, they seemed to fall away. All that mattered was that she was alive, that she had a future, and he was going to fight for that future, no matter what it took. "I'll help you fight," Marcus said, his voice low but determined. "We'll do this together." The Empress didn't say anything at first. She only nodded slightly, the pain in her eyes still there but now softened by the quiet comfort of his words. She was still the Empress, but in this moment she was also just a woman who needed someone to stand beside her. And Marcus would stay beside her through the battles ahead, through the uncertainty of the future. Because, for the first time in his life, he knew exactly what he was fighting for. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for her. And that somehow felt like enough. Together they would face whatever came next. Together they would fight for the future of Lothar. And together they would never be alone again. The battle outside had not slowed, and Marcus could hear the sounds of destruction growing louder with each passing minute. The rumble of energy blasts echoed in the distance, the clashes of metal and the screams of war pressing against the thin walls of the temple. But in this small corner of Lothar, there was only the quiet, heavy silence between him and the Empress. Marcus had never seen her so vulnerable. Even now, as she lay beside him, bloodied and broken, there was a quiet strength about her. Her sharp features, once etched with the impervious look of royalty, now held something softer. It wasn't weakness, he knew that. It was something human. And for the first time, it felt like she was allowing herself to be seen, truly seen, by someone who wasn't just bowing before her throne. She stirred beside him, a slight movement that sent a fresh wave of pain across her body. Her face tightened, her breath hitching. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely audible. "I shouldn't be this way." Marcus's heart twisted at her words. She was apologizing for being human, apologizing for needing help. He couldn't understand why someone as strong as her would ever feel the need to do that, but he knew this wasn't the Empress he had first met. This wasn't the mighty ruler of Lothar. This was someone who had never been allowed to feel weak, someone who had carried the weight of her people's future on her shoulders for too long. "Don't apologize," he said softly, his hand resting against hers. "You're allowed to be human. You're allowed to feel, and I'm here." Her violet eyes flickered to him, a softness in them that made his chest tighten. She was looking at him differently now, no longer as the soldier who had stumbled into her world, but as someone who mattered, someone who had fought beside her, someone who had stayed when others would have left. "I'm supposed to be their leader," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm supposed to lead them to victory, to be their symbol of strength. and yet here I am, broken and helpless." Marcus shook his head, his fingers gently squeezing hers. "You've been their symbol of strength every day, even now. You've led them with everything you have. You've fought for them, bled for them, but you don't have to carry that alone anymore. You're not alone, not anymore." The Empress closed her eyes for a moment, her chest rising and falling slowly. There was a deep sigh that escaped her lips, and for the first time she seemed to relax, even if just for a moment. The weight of the empire, of her people's expectations, still lingered in her heart, but the hardness in her eyes had softened. "I don't know how to let go," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been holding everything together for so long. I don't know what it's like to trust someone else." Marcus's hand moved gently to her cheek, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "You don't have to trust everyone," he said, his voice steady and sure. "But you can trust me. You don't have to do this alone." The Empress looked up at him, her gaze searching, as if looking for something in his eyes. Maybe she was looking for the same thing he had been looking for in hers, a promise that they weren't just passing ships in the dark, that they were more than this fleeting moment of pain and fear, that they could be something real. She didn't say anything, but the silence between them spoke volumes. Her heart was open, raw, and vulnerable, and for the first time Marcus felt like he could truly see her, past the crown, past the armor, past the fearsome ruler. She was just a woman who had been carrying the weight of the world for too long. "Let me help you," Marcus said, his voice soft but firm. "Let me help you heal not just your body but your heart." The Empress turned her head slightly, her eyes looking at him as if she was seeing him for the first time. For a long moment she was quiet, and Marcus thought she might not answer. But then she nodded, just barely, her lips trembling. "I'm afraid," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm afraid of losing everything. I'm afraid of trusting someone and having them take it all away." Marcus's heart broke for her. The Empress had never known what it was like to trust without fear. She had never allowed herself to lean on anyone, always keeping her distance from the ones who admired her, the ones who loved her. But now, in this fragile moment, she was reaching out. Not with her power, not with her pride, but with the woman inside, the woman who just wanted to be seen, to be held, to be loved. "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm here for you no matter what, and I will always be here." The Empress didn't respond with words, but the way her eyes softened was enough. In that moment, Marcus knew she was beginning to believe him. They sat in silence, the sounds of war still echoing in the distance, but the world outside didn't matter. For the first time in what felt like forever, Marcus and the Empress were in the same place, not just physically but emotionally. They were no longer just a soldier and a queen. They were two people who had found something in each other that neither had expected. In that moment, Marcus knew one thing for sure. No matter what the future held, they would face it together. And that was more than enough. The first light of dawn crept through the cracks in the ruined temple, casting a pale golden glow across the broken stone walls. The battle outside was slowly winding down. The distant sounds of conflict were quieter now, replaced by the muffled voices of the Lotharian soldiers gathering their strength for the final push. But here, in the heart of the temple, there was only silence, a calm that felt more sacred than any battlefield. Marcus sat beside the Empress, her head resting on his shoulder. Her breath was steady now, her pulse strong, though still weak. The wound she had suffered was still there, a dark reminder of the battle she had fought, but it no longer seemed like it would be the end of her. She was still alive. She was still with him. His hand rested gently on her arm, and for the first time in a long while he felt a peace he hadn't known he needed. The weight of the war, of the galaxy's expectations, of the endless fighting, none of it mattered in this moment. Here, there was only the two of them, together. The Empress stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. She blinked slowly, and for a moment her gaze was unfocused, distant. But then, as if remembering where she was, she turned her head toward him. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice still hoarse. Her lips trembled as she spoke, as though the effort to say his name was a struggle. "Hey," he said softly, brushing a strand of her dark hair from her face. "How are you feeling?" Her gaze softened as she studied him. There was something new in her eyes now. It wasn't just the ruler, the Empress who had once commanded entire armies. It was something else, something human. "I don't know how to thank you," she murmured, her voice barely audible, "for everything." Marcus shook his head. "You don't need to thank me," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I'm just keeping my promise." The Empress didn't answer right away. Instead, she simply looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. The bond between them, once fragile, now felt stronger than ever. She had trusted him with her life, and in return, he had given her the one thing she had never allowed herself to have. Someone to fight for her, someone to stand by her side, someone who didn't care about her title or her power. "I never thought I would have someone like you beside me," she said quietly, her voice full of quiet wonder. "Not like this, not as a companion." Marcus's heart swelled at her words. He had never thought he would be here, either, fighting beside the Empress of Lothar, a woman who had seemed untouchable, a figure of power and pride. But now, here they were, two people from different worlds, fighting for something bigger than just survival. "You're not alone anymore," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'm not leaving." The Empress closed her eyes, a soft sigh escaping her lips. "I used to think I had to carry everything alone, that I couldn't let anyone in. But now I realize that strength doesn't mean never needing anyone." Marcus smiled, his thumb brushing across her hand. "Strength means having the courage to trust someone, to let them in." Her eyes opened again, and this time they held no trace of the distance or the fear that had once been there. There was only warmth, only a quiet understanding. She wasn't just the ruler of Lothar now. She was a woman who had found something real, something worth protecting. The Empress sat up slowly, wincing slightly as she moved. Marcus was right there, his hand hovering close by, ready to steady her. She looked at him, the faintest hint of a smile on her lips. "I think I'm ready," she said softly. "Ready for what?" Marcus asked, his voice laced with curiosity. "To lead again," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "To fight, but this time with you." For a long moment, Marcus just looked at her. The woman who had once been untouchable, unreachable, was now someone who had chosen to open her heart. And she wasn't just ready to lead, she was ready to do it with him. "I'll stand beside you," he said, his voice firm, filled with a promise. "Every step of the way." The Empress looked out through the broken window of the temple, her eyes searching the horizon, where the first rays of the sun were beginning to rise. The war was far from over, but there was a new strength in her now. Not just the strength of a queen, but the strength of a woman who had found something worth fighting for. Together they would rebuild. Together they would fight for Lothar. Together they would face whatever came next. No matter what happened, they wouldn't face it alone. The Empress turned back to him, her face softening into something more genuine than he had ever seen. She wasn't just the Empress of Lothar anymore. She was his ally, his partner, and in that moment she was his. "Together," she whispered, her voice full of quiet resolve. Marcus nodded, his heart swelling with pride. Together. The new dawn had arrived, and with it, a new future for both of them.